I make money playing Factorio, which by definition makes me a professional, but I like to think that it also means I'm pretty good at it. And despite being a force in the genre of automation games, I've never really played anything but Factorio. I mean, it seemed pointless, because there's already Factorio. I remember when Satisfactory was first announced, and I was like, why? Don't they know Factorio exists? And when I heard it would be 3D, I was like, but the third dimension is not necessary for building the factory. Well, instead of assuming that for the rest of my life, I've decided to finally play it. Also, this is what my Patreon supporters wanted. They're the ones who pay the bills, people. And if all you want is my opinion, was it fun? Yes. Is it better than Factorio? No. Moving on, it seems like there's actual lore. In Factorio, you just spawn next to a crashed spaceship, but here it seems we're a wage slave with our own AI supervisor with attitude. I probably could have skipped it, but I wanted the full beginner experience, and so I decided to do the tutorial. Starting with iron seems pretty ubiquitous, and here you just smash deposits with a chisel. Also, there's random enemies apparently. I'm no stranger to Xenocide, so we'll need to see if the skills are transferable. Also, sorry, but the first part of this video is going to be a little deep-fried since I changed some settings in OBS and it defaulted to a bitrate of 2,500 kilobits per second for some reason. Regardless, I've got a hub. I guess this is supposed to be the lab's equivalent. That's where we unlock new stuff in any case. We're also starting off with some handcrafting. I'm not sure how, but I'm smashing iron ore so hard it's turning into iron plates. It's the future, who cares? After spending quite a while smacking this iron deposit, I have finally managed to get enough to research the actual hub. Is research the right word here? I guess we unlock things in Satisfactory. This answers my question of when I'm allowed to actually automate stuff. Apparently I need to burn leaves to make the power, so I go around collecting grass, and good lord, this is horrible for the bitrate. Professional YouTuber, by the way. For once it's not YouTube's fault. I'm still kind of getting my bearings. It's a little weird that I think the map is static, and so all these deposits are in the same place every time, but here's some copper. Just like in Factorio, it seems necessary to make the actual poles necessary to transmit power, but after handcrafting a bunch more stuff, I get the next hub upgrade. This only took me 24 minutes, but we're still world record pace. I also unlocked an office. That's much more than the Factorio engineer gets. It even has a toilet. I've unlocked the assembler, which is called a constructor, but it takes some reinforced iron plates, so it's back to handcrafting. To be fair, it's part of the tutorial that I willingly selected, but at least in Factorio you can do stuff while you're handcrafting. I've just got to stare at this window the whole time. So I placed down my first smelter, and I've got to power it, but that takes concrete, which takes limestone. So I've got to find it and then smack this thing a little bit. I'm getting a little bit more used to using the resource scanner. The concept is just unfamiliar to me since in Factorio you either have your eyes or the map screen. By the way, if you wanted a satisfactory playthrough without constant comparisons to Factorio, you have come to the wrong place. Now I managed to turn raw limestone into concrete and build a power pole, or at least attempt to. I know this thing should give off power, but I'm not so certain how to move it. I assumed the poles would have an AoE or something, but then I realized that I need to place the pole and then manually attach the cables. Well, now I can power a single machine. Hooray! I still don't have a way to get ore automatically, so I'm doing this again. At least I can marginally speed up my production of iron products. I place a constructor immediately in front of the smelter trying to make iron plates, but it also needs power. I try to daisy chain the machines, and that doesn't work. I can only attach things to poles, which have 4 connections. I don't even have belts yet, so I can't make it work either. I thought I remembered hearing something about automated mining, but I haven't seen anything like that. So apparently my mistake was not realizing that under the special tab there's a new building called the Equipment Workshop that I can just build, and it's only inside there that I can craft a portable miner. In Factorio, I just open up my inventory and see the new recipe there since your inventory and all your recipes are neatly next to each other, but whatever, I've got automated mining. Also, I've got to drag that into my hand slot to actually be able to deploy it. When it does deploy, well, it's a lot less than I expected, and there's no way to automate it, but it's at least much faster than doing things by hand. With that thing's help, I managed to handcraft even more stuff and upgrade the hub again. It gives me belts, and I can see in the next upgrade the actual mining drill. I've just got to handcraft a bunch more stuff to get it. I do use my amazing new belts to connect the smelter to the assembler. This is a major difference from Factorio, because there we just use inserters to move things in and out of machines, but here, belts are everything. That'll make me some rods while I get back to more of the random stuff. I mine a bunch of this limestone, but then I realized I should just make some more deployable mining drills and throw them down. Also, just grabbing more leaves everywhere I go because this is my only source of power. Now for the iron deposit, I placed down my first mining drill. It feels a little weird just having these nodes, when in Factorio you can end up with potentially hundreds of mining drills to cover a single patch, but at least it's straightforward. If I connect these to the smelter with a belt, it'll be fully automated. This is an impure patch, and I guess that means it's slow, because this one miner is fully consumed by a single smelter. Well, I grab the stack of copper ore from the mini miner and start crafting ingots by hand, and then go leave to take a piss or something. It takes about a minute, but that's enough to finish up the last hub upgrade. Or it would be if I wasn't rudely interrupted by this fuse blowing. Apparently when you're not making enough power in Satisfactory, the whole thing just breaks. Unlike Factorio, where things just perform worse and worse the less power you have. I do appreciate that the switch is analog, though. This is also about the time I discovered crouch jumping. And after an hour and 10 minutes, I have finished the tutorial. This does not bode well for the length of this video. As far as I can tell, I've mostly unlocked the ability to build more biomass burners, which means I can make more than just a handful of buildings. Only problem is, I've got to grab more of this negative bitrate grass to fuel it, and that means it won't be fully automated, which also means it is an affront to the automation genre. Then I find this purple circle in the forest while I'm gathering that stuff, and I'm getting shot by a fire-breathing lizard. It might be aliens or whatever, but I don't have time to worry about that. I've got a factory to build. With the biomass burners stocked up with leaves and woods, now I can actually try and get some of this new research for things like foundations. Also, splitters and mergers, which seem important, so it's back to the grind. I am still fumbling around with the interface. There's like a million things all over, and maybe I'm just taking my intimate knowledge of Factorio's commands for granted, but it's really hard for me to just look at what recipes I have. I realize you can hit N and search, and then I figure out you can hit O for the list, but it's still a little inconvenient. Regardless, seeing how much concrete and copper wire I've been using, it seems like a good idea to do some quick automation, turning limestone directly into concrete and copper into ingots, and then wires. The power pole reach is really long too. I am not used to that. I'll just put that into one of these storage containers, basically the same as I do in Factorio. As soon as I've set the recipes, I've got at least some production of all the random things I'll need. Seeing the stuff on the belts up close like this does have its own appeal. If only I couldn't count the pixels. Setting this up, I'm starting to realize the challenges of a 3D world, as I place this down, thinking it aligns, only to realize that the belt can't fit, so I've got to undo it and try again. The top-down view of Factorio makes things like this a lot less frequent. So I've at least cut down on some handcrafting, except just to get this has already consumed all of the power from the hub's 2 biomass burners and I've blown a fuse. Clearly, I need more power. I build one of those biomass burners, and this is when I also realize that there's a recipe for biomass, which takes leaves and wood. You can burn leaves on their own, but turning them into biomass first increases their fuel value, so I've got a constructor set up that'll just hand feed and output directly into the generator. That gives me enough juice to power this raggedy construction long enough to unlock logistics. I've noticed that being able to only connect one thing to another thing is pretty limiting. Also, I still need fuel, so let's gather some leaves. I can't tell if this looks better or worse sped up like this. I want at least enough power to get some real automation going, so I decide to build a bunch more biomass burners. It'll be just like that first one, except I can actually use splitters. Being a Factorio player, at least half of my brain is dedicated to memorizing ratios, and so I quickly realized that one biomass assembler can feed about 6 biomass burners. And so clearly I've got to split one lane into 6. This is really simple in Factorio, and balancers like this one are pretty common to evenly distribute resources, but here I end up with this thing. But it works. I've only got 4 for now, but I'll fill out the rest later. I've also researched foundations, and after experiencing the joys of building on the ground, I think I'm ready to have an even flat surface to build on. Things snap nicely on them, and even though it's a little stupid, I made 2 machines that make plates and rods to help fill up my supplies. It's really weird coming from Factorio where you have to build discrete items like assemblers to place them, versus here where you can materialize them from raw ingredients. Not complaining though. This glut of raw materials allows me to unlock this thing called a MAM, which is some sort of tech tree. I'd assumed the hub would handle all the unlocks, but I guess there's a bunch of random stuff in here as well. I can't really research anything except for that sphere, but it gets me nothing, so back to work. My research has also given me a chainsaw. It's just a faster way to get biomass, which is nice because I was tired of being a bush goblin. After 2 hours of handcrafting, it feels like my cred as a Factorio player is slipping away, so I actually want to automate something. I build a nice platform over here, and I spy some iron deposits over there. These two are normal veins, so they should give me about 60 iron ore per minute each. And can I just say how weird it is to be thinking of things in per minute? In Factorio, it's always per second, but I guess because it's full 3D, it's better to have fewer discrete items for performance reasons. Well, I put that all in some smelters, and now I have 2 full belts of iron ingots. After this resounding success, I decide to see what happens if you throw yourself off the world.
Return fix-it property to
And after that, I start playing some games in my office. This was the end of my first session, and the best thing about that is I realized that the recording looked like trash, so I fixed it. Just look at all that graphical fidelity. I accidentally overcompensated, and this one file turned into 160 gigabytes of lossless video, but if it looks bad from here on out, it's not my fault. This is the first time I've had to worry about stuff like this, but with 60 plates of input, I can fully utilize 2 assemblers to make plates. I put some storage containers in front of them because I also want to be able to pull out any excess for personal use, but it feels a little clunky. You can do this with just an inserter and a chest in Factorio if you want to skim a few, but it's a little tougher here. Also, you can't limit the size of the chest, so you've got to fill the whole thing whether you want to or not. I also found the detached camera mode. That's nice. The main thing I want to automate right now are reinforced plates, since that'll let me make constructors easier. Constructors can only take 1 input, unlike Factorio where an assembler can take as many inputs as you can fit inserters. And so to make an item that takes 2 items, I've got to use an assembler. An actual assembler. Yeah, you're gonna need to get used to me calling everything an assembler on accident. The reinforced plates take plates and screws, which take rods. Also, this is sort of a meta thing, but I'm realizing that doing my usual explain the whole crafting process thing I do for my videos might not cut it for this one because it's just so hard to visually show what an assembler is doing. With all these massive buildings and grounded view, it's difficult to convey the purpose of them. There's no alt mode to show the recipes, so it's just machines doing machine things, and unless you can see the output and the input, it's hard to really tell. This is also when I discovered one of the biggest pains in Satisfactory. This splitter looks like the belt should be connected, but it's not. And if you have a functional splitter with all the belts intact, delete it and then replace it, even though it looks just like it did before, it won't work because the belts aren't attached. You've got to reattach every single point. Regardless, after a couple hours, I've got my first real automated thing. Just this will save me a lot of effort, but since the assembling machines take rotors, I've got to make those as well. I'll place the assembler right next to the other one, but they take screws and rods instead of plates, and this leads to my first time wrangling with the 3D aspect of the game. I'm kinda realizing that you can just do all sorts of horrendous things, and sometimes building belts operates on the honor system that you won't let things clip too much, because it'll still work most of the time even if it does. Right now I've got this thing, which makes rotors and reinforced plates. I think it's safe to say that I'm basically the best Satisfactory player of all time. It's slow, but it's faster than it would be handcrafting. I've got to say, of all the things that have annoyed me, this up-close view of your factories does have its own vibe to it. I realize I've had the objective to build a space elevator for the past 2 hours, so I should probably do that. I build what I think is a fairly sizable platform and then try to place it, only to end up inside of it. I can hear this incredibly dramatic animation playing even though I can't see it, and it's with a vague twinge of bathos that I deconstruct it and place it down again. I'll admit, it's certainly majestic, but all I can wonder is how I managed to fit the items necessary to build an entire space elevator inside of my pocket. Anyway, it connects to space, and now I've got my next objective. I've got to put 50 smart platings inside of the space elevator. I'd assumed that researching stuff at the hub was my goal, but now there's this. Smart plating is made from reinforced plate and rotors, and would you look at that, I've already got both of those automated. Well, kind of. I'd only built these thinking they'd feed my personal supply, but now I've got to start making stuff with them. Both of these assemblers are horribly understocked. The main culprit is screws and rods, but I've got this whole other belt of iron at my disposal. See, this is the kind of expertise I'm bringing in from Factorio, the almighty axiom of if you don't have enough of something, just make more of it. After routing all of these belts, I am proud to bring in my other favorite axiom. You can make it as terrible as you want as long as you call it your starter base. Behold, my mighty screw empire. That sped things up significantly, and for a second it looks like everything's good, only for another fuse to blow. Well, I did say I was going to add 2 burners later, and so I do so with even more immaculate belting. I'm only now realizing all the different belt building modes, like straight, curved, and default. Also, despite needing to make it for my chainsaw, this is when I realized that solid biofuel is better than biomass and increases my fuel efficiency even further, and so I add another assembler behind the first. There's separate recipes for biofuel from leaves or wood, but I'm just manually switching between the two whenever I run out of one or the other. At least I've got smart plating automated. It might be slow, but it lets me do other stuff while it's building. Okay, so I ran out of concrete and went all the way over here to set up 2 concrete mines to make a big stockpile, but I never really used it. Anyway, I hook up the smart plating to the space elevator, and then I figure I should probably try and unlock the rest of the researches in here. It gives me the awesome shop and the awesome sink. Yeah, it's a store that unlocks stuff in exchange for tickets, and you get the tickets from throwing garbage into the awesome sink. So between this, the hub, the MAM, and the space elevator, that's what, 4 separate progression paths? Well, I'll try to remember them all. It's also at this point I learn of the color customizer. I'm feeling frisky, so I make my default palette green and purple, because, you know, I thought this base could use a little dose of color. Then I got so distracted trying to increase my plate production that I didn't realize I'd filled the space elevator already. But I've used this lift to move the ingots up. That's cool. Okay, I realize the space elevator exists and send all those things up. The animation is really fancy. You've got this thing breaking through the clouds, then this whole station starts spreading out above you, then after they've wowed you, they drop the requirements for the next phase. 1,000 smart plating, 1,000 versatile framework, and 100 automated wirings. I don't even know how to make those last 2. I look it up, and I get nothing. Well, welcome to Satisfactory, I guess. I find a slug sitting on a rock and just casually put it in my pocket. I mean, it's a pretty cool slug to be fair. There is a lot of random stuff in this game, and going through some of these MAM researches is a little convoluted. I'm just doing a bunch of random stuff right now, like buying a cup of coffee from the awesome shop, but it's safe to say that I'm gonna need a bigger base. Biomass is absolutely ass, and when I see coal power on the researches, I know immediately what I'm doing. I can't build a bigger base until I've got bigger power. There's a coal patch down here, and so I make this giant ramp to go get it, but then I'm like, it also takes water and there is none anywhere nearby, so I should probably find a better spot. I did find this cool-ass growing out of the rocks, though. I've actually got to explore a little bit. This is where the game totally diverges from Factorio, because in there, the only good of exploring is to find more random ore patches, but here, there's actual stuff to find and discover. The nodes are often concentrated into specific locations, so there's a lot more building around things where they are than there is in Factorio. Maybe I'm just wired weird, but all I want to do is expand the factory, and all this frolicking through nature is merely a distraction. Eventually, I find this lake with some coal nearby, and that seems just like what I was looking for. It's an interesting feeling. It's not really serendipitous because the developers probably intended it to be used exactly for this purpose. Does it make me weird if knowing that the developers intended me to behave a certain way that it only makes me want to do it differently? Well, that's basically the story of my entire YouTube career, isn't it? Anyway, I've brought the coal in and built a few generators, but I realize I'm short on supplies to actually build them. For all the differences I've been pointing out, I will say that this happens all the time in Factorio as well. I've got to go all the way back to my base, and I can't imagine how painful this would be if the developers hadn't included bunny hopping as a mechanic. It's just a shame that a single upslope will kill all your momentum. Well, I'm finally back and ready to tackle fluids. I've just got to place this giant pump and route it into all my coal plants. Yeah, that's perfect. Now I just need to run all the way back so I can actually power the coal miner. I should probably mention that I was streaming this whole adventure to my patrons, and for some reason they really enjoyed this build. I mean, what's not to like? I realized that with 60 coal per minute from the mine, I could fit a 4th one, since they all take 15 coal per minute. I'll be honest, I still really don't get how to build pipes. It feels really unwieldy, but eventually I get this. A finer coal plant has never been made, and that's 300 megawatts of power. The best part? I don't need to cut down trees to feed it. I'll need more power at some point, but that's the most I can extract from that one mine. This base has been kind to me, but I think I'm better off building a new one from scratch. At least it'll supply me with rotors and reinforced plates. I turned off the smart plating since there's no way I'm waiting for all 1,000 to come from this one base. We're at about 7 hours now, and I still need to handcraft these modular frames so they can unlock steel processing. It's a prerequisite to make the versatile framework, so it's got to be done. If I want to make a new base, I don't need to look far because there's a ton of iron ore up here, as well as some coal. I've unlocked faster belts, but I don't make enough reinforced plates to actually use them everywhere, so instead I'm still using these slow 60 items per minute belts. Also, placing belts on the grass and trying to get them to look decent is a fool's errand, I've realized. Now I can start placing down all the smelters. I've got a whole 4 normal iron mines, which will give me 240 ore per minute, and that means I need 8 smelters to use it all. But wait, I've also got these foundries, and to make steel it's half coal and half iron, so some of it will need to go to that. Hey, I actually caught a time-lapse this time. It's really rough when you're actually building, but once it's done, this game is pretty satisfying to look at. That gives me some raw materials to work with. It only feels a little better than my last one. I'm still really limited by resources. Since I'm mostly rebuilding what I already made, most of these will turn into plates, rods, and screws. I'm also trying to get vertical, so I've made this extra floor up here where I'll actually build all the screws. These conveyor lifts are pretty awesome. Only problem is, it's a little tough for my puny human legs to actually get up there. It may be almost impossible to tell what I'm doing with all this stuff, but at least it looks cool. I've kind of given up explaining it, but at least we can look at all the belts together. I've unlocked the ability to make these alien DNA capsules from the meat I get from killing random enemies, and I can turn those in at the sink to get tickets for the shop, and in the shop I can buy a ladder. The stuff in here pretends to be optional, but I cannot imagine building anything without the ladder now. I also bought the conveyor belt hole because I thought it was necessary to put a lift in through a solid floor, but apparently not. It's mostly just decoration. At the end of the day, this is what I've got. Again, it's a little difficult to show stuff in this game because even when I'm using the camera to get an aerial view, you can't see what's going on down there. The screws come from above and make the 2 assemblers worth of reinforced plates. It's a start. Now I need some rotors, and let me tell you, Factorio is capable of some pretty impressive spaghetti, but Satisfactory is on another level entirely. With the 3rd dimension, if you want to get something somewhere, there is not much stopping you. There's smart plating again, and at an acceptable scale. Now I need to work on that versatile framework. It takes steel plates, as well as these modular frames. Those were the main headache, but that's why I made 2 reinforced plate assemblers as well as some extra rods. There's my cubes. It's dark, and my Factorio instincts are telling me to put lamps everywhere, but instead I've just got to appreciate the nighttime ambience. As much as I'd love to finish out the frameworks, I've run out of power again. Those 4 coal plants just aren't making enough anymore, so it's time to make more. I think another 6 should keep me going for now, but why build 6 next to each other when you can build 3 and then another 3 on top? Okay, I was kind of taking the piss with this one, but it's also because I just wanted to play around with the verticality more to get some experience. It's kind of what you'd expect, but at least I've got ladders. I'm becoming more comfortable with the splitters, but one thing I'm not comfortable with are the pipes. Let me tell you, getting these pipes to do what I wanted was an exercise in madness. It's not like Factorio where when you click a square you know that it'll be filled with a belt. In Satisfactory you need to build between 2 points. And if you want that second point to be in the air, well, you better get ready for some shenanigans. Also, I didn't realize that fluids had to be pumped to go up this kind of height, but that's the story of how we ended up with this. You also might be wondering, how can he build 6 more coal plants if he was already using the maximum output of that coal mine? Well, as it turns out, this game has speed modules, and that slug I picked up can be squeezed into a canister that'll let me get up to 150% more coal per coal. It also increases power draw, but who cares? However, despite being able to crank it up to 150 coal per second, I can only extract 120 because that's the limit of my best belt. At least it was, until I researched Logistics Mark III. This thing always flies off when you finish a research, and I decided to take a ride. I'm not sure what I expected to happen, but you get a really great view from up here. Okay, now I've just got to make some steel plates from those steel ingots, and that's Versatile Frameworks finished. I'll only need 1,000 of them, but it's good to know that they're slowly plugging away along with my smart plating. That leaves the automated wiring. That takes a stator and 20 cables. And stators are made with steel pipes as well as copper wire. Not too bad, but it does mean I need to make some copper production up here. It's clear I've given up any hope of this second base being organized. It's okay, it's just my second starter base. Then I accidentally fall into this cave out of nowhere. Inside is another one of those purple spheres, and then this crazy spider thing that's trying to kill me. It's not even playing fair as it's decided to phase into the rocks. I am rewarded for my bravery with a slew of slugs. This was a very interesting diversion, but I've got a factory to build. I've also got to make some cables out of the other copper ingots I made, but put that all together and that's my automated wiring. I only need 100, but even though I'd built this to run without downtime at 2.5 per minute, that's still 40 minutes to get all the items I need. And that's nothing on the 5 per minute of the Versatile Framework. That one's gonna take 3 hours. I've got nothing better to do while the base finishes up those supplies, so I should probably explore some more. I see this car in the MAM researches, and the Factorio car is a game changer for exploring, so obviously I want this one too, but it takes these crystal oscillators, and that takes quartz. I search for quartz, and it's in a completely different biome. I run all the way there, then deploy a bunch of tiny mining drills, run all the way back, handcraft a ton of oscillators and motors, and there it is. The car. It took me about 30 minutes to finally get this, and how does it drive? Kinda terrible, honestly. It doesn't turn very quickly, or go that much faster than just bunny hopping, and with a map as varied as it is, you're constantly going off ramps that kill all your maneuverability. Oh yeah, and I got 3 stars in every stage of Product Packer, and now I've got nothing left to kill my time with. I wept, for there were no more worlds left to conquer. I also realized I need some motors and encased steel beams to finish up all the Phase 1 research, so I make them up here. It's hand-fed with concrete because I'm too lazy to build it up there. Okay, now I should go explore. I try to give the car a second chance, and I figure I'll take some back roads on the way to increase my coal plant production now that I have Mark II mining drills and Mark III belts, but then... Okay, how was I supposed to know that there was a giant gaping pit of nothingness in the middle of the land? That's it, I am never using this car again. I try to go back to get my stuff, and break my ankles and die because I didn't realize that the game doesn't respawn you at max HP for some reason. And then I realize I can't even find my stuff. It's like on the sheer cliff or something, so I just reload and autosave. Awesome. Alright, time to make another 6 coal plants, and actually side by side this time. I've had enough of the stacking shenanigans. I'm still struggling to make the pipes do what I want, but it's slightly better this time. I need to disconnect this from the larger base since it actually blew a fuse, and flipping it on right now would just make it shut down again instantly. Once all the plants are up and running, I can reattach it. Also, I finally changed my default pipe color to the factory-approved green. I find a sulfur node and mine a bit because it can be used for explosives. I noticed that this thing near my base looked destructible, and sure enough, it is. Inside is just a bunch of noxious gas and some spiders, so whatever. Then I find this broken pod, and inside is a hard drive. I set up this thing at the old base to make steel beams and steel pipes because all my steel is currently tied up in making the stuff for the space elevator, and the belts you can make from the beams are incredibly powerful for how easy it is to get steel beams, and the pipes are used in Mark II miners. With Mark II miners and power shards, a mine that used to give out 60 ore per second can now spit out 300. There's the throughput I've been looking for. Alright, now I'm exploring for real this time, propelled entirely by my mighty feet. It's worth noting that to unlock the true power of my mining drills, I need to find slugs. There's also these orbs again, and I should probably mention that whenever you pick one of them up, you get some gnomic amphigory about aliens and stuff. Listen, I'm in the business of either shooting them or stealing from them. I'm not really sure how to talk to them. So I continue my adventure, picking up stuff like slugs, hard drive, Mercer spheres, and summer sloops, bashing things in the head and eating nuts along the way. So I find some uranium and decide to mine it by hand, which was apparently a really bad idea. In my defense, stuff like quartz, caterium, and sulfur all unlocked new researches in the MAM when I mined them by hand, so I figured this would be no different. Not long after, I jumped down onto this island with another wrecked drop pod, only to get wrecked myself by a giant radioactive hog. That kicked off Operation Get My Stuff Back, which thankfully wasn't too hard thanks to my bountiful supply of nuts. Like I said, I was streaming this, and despite my threats of violence against anyone backseating or spoiling me, there was one thing that they insisted upon hinting at until I actually listened to them. Down the BRAP tunnels that I previously ignored is this purple resource node. There's also mycelium, but mainly it's about this stuff. There's a big hole in the ceiling, so I think I'm just gonna get it out this way. I seriously cannot imagine life without ladders. The conveyor lifts don't go that high, and so I've got to chain a bunch of them together. This is really hard to do without falling to my death, which I almost do at some point. But eventually I get it up and built it all the way back to my base. It's gonna take a while for it to actually show up, and what better use of my time than finishing up Phase 2? And there it goes. That took me about, 14 hours total. There are so many beautiful things in here, too. Jetpack, petroleum power, who can say no? But I'll worry about that later. I've still got this SAM stuff. Alright, SAM, reanimated SAM, SAM fluctuators, and dimensional depot uploader. Okay, it looks like this is the use for those spheres I've been picking up. They're basically the equivalent of provider chests in Factorio, minus the construction bots. They let you upload materials to the cloud and pull from that supply whenever you're building something without needing to constantly fill your inventory. But by putting one of these at the end of all of my supplies, I basically have an inexhaustible supply of building materials, no more needing to micromanage my inventory. Now I see why they wanted me to get them so badly. This will make building a whole lot easier. I spent the next hour or so just setting up all my supplies to feed their own depots, and in the meantime I realized you can scan hard drives you find at the MAM, and when you do, you get alternate recipes. Okay, this one actually blew my mind. My Factorio brain could not comprehend the game hiding recipes from you via RNG. It's interesting, and I guess it does encourage exploring, but it still feels so weird. Like, imagine if you were playing C-Block and the path for bioplastic was locked behind killing 1,000 worms instead of research. Regardless, I take the steel rods because that seems extremely good. Oh yeah, and I turned all the things I killed into DNA capsules and managed to amass 45 tickets. Then someone told me to throw a ticket into the sink, and so I did. It unlocked the Cyber Wagon. That's pretty cheeky, and it costs 20 tickets. I buy it anyway, because maybe a cheap car that only costs 10 reinforced plates might be useful, but this thing is absolutely useless. It burns fuel like crazy, bounces all over the place, and can only make right turns. In case you were worried that the people watching me were being too helpful, remember this. Oh yeah, and apparently summer sloops are productivity modules, and using them just gives you free stuff. So about Phase 3. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna build a new base from scratch again. Now that I've basically quintupled my ability to extract resources, this thing is just a mess. I need to make 2.5k of the frameworks, but the other things I have no idea about. You can see them as rewards for research, but I can't know what they're made of until I research them, and that means I need to make plastic and rubber. The only oil nearby is in this biome a million miles away from my base, so transporting it is going to be an issue. Also, I've got a jetpack now, so I don't need to worry about falling off cliffs and dying anymore. People struggle with oil in Factorio as well, but let's see if my genius technique of put the fluid outputs into the fluid input works here as well. Both plastic and rubber are made from straight crude oil, and so I don't need to refine it into petroleum like I do in Factorio, but it does make this heavy oil residue byproduct. Looking into it, that can just be made into liquid fuel, and liquid fuel can be burned for power at a gas plant, so no big deal. I've realized that it's way easier to put the pipes on the ground and then belt out the solids with conveyor lifts. I'm starting with 2 plants for both plastic and rubber, because I mostly need it just to research things. And I'm pretty sure that by the time I actually need this stuff in production, I'll have stocked up thousands. I need to run all of these massive power poles to actually start making the plastic, but after that, the problem is actually getting it back to the base. I could just run a massive belt like I did to get it across this lake, but instead I've decided to try and use the trucks to transport them. My last experience with trucks in Factorio was less than ideal, so maybe this one will be different. So it's a long way to my base, and there's a bunch of stuff in the way, so clearly the most rational decision is to build a gigantic platform in the sky that goes over all of it. There's a little bit of cliff in the way, but I won't let that stop me. I'll just put the rest of the depots over here and then cover everything with railings. Safety first. Okay, to set these things up, you need to physically drive them while recording a route, and so I've got to drive this whole horrendous path twice to make a circle. Sick jumps included. Alright, I tried to switch it onto automatic, and its first decision is to drive in the complete opposite direction and get stuck onto a tree. I try to free it, and then it just teleports back onto the path. They can do that? I need to ride it for the cinematic shot, but it just keeps driving away. I block it with my face and almost make it drive off, but now I can ride it. And, I've got the live recording, so why don't I just use that? What the hell is it doing? Where are we going? What are we doing? What are we doing? Oh god, it's going down. No! I'm okay. You know, even though I think Factorio's the better game, I will admit it's never made me cry laughing before. So after that wonderful experience, I'm able to get the thing working and take some actual footage this time. I managed to make it around the South American Death Road, and from there it's all the way down to the depots. I've decided to dub this the Pooper Highway. Now I just need to do the other car for the plastic. for a second it seems like it works, and then it tells me that there's a deadlock and they refuse to pass each other. You are telling me that these things can teleport, fly, and phase through solid matter but not go around each other? Well, whatever. I made some packaged fuel from the fuel byproduct to actually fuel the trucks, but this kicked off my adventure to widen the road so the trucks could go around each other, only to realize that even if there's room for them to go around, the trucks won't even try if their waypoints go right through each other. Okay, I re-recorded the paths, and yes, I know it's stupid to keep the death road, but I will not compromise on my ideals. I thought, it's only a little bit, they won't get deadlocked on it, but they did. So instead of fixing that, I just removed one of the trucks and made one carry both rubber and plastic. That means it'll all be jumbled together in storage, but who cares? I'd just like to point out that it took me about 3 or 4 hours messing with this thing to make it work, and for all the Satisfactory players watching this, I could start a new game and then beat Factorio in the time that it took me to finish this. Alright, let's try to put the truck instant behind us and actually work on Phase 3. So my plan is just rebuild everything from scratch, and to do that, I'll need iron, but primarily steel. Since I've got that recipe that lets me make rods from steel, that means I can make screws from steel, which will save me a ton of iron, and since steel is more efficient overall, it's really a no-brainer. I try to figure out the blueprinting system, but give up. This is probably my biggest complaint about Satisfactory, but in Factorio, where you can copy anything you want and paste it, in Satisfactory it's done in this building and only in this building. That means you need to preempt what designs you'll be using more than once. It's totally natural to already have built something and be like, oh, I need more, and then just copy it, but not here. After building that, I realize I need way more power. Fortunately, I know just where to get it. I've got my pooper highway, so it's not a terribly inconvenient journey, and I actually get a little use out of the cyber wagon to go down the straightaway, even though it can hardly even manage that. I already built one of the fuel plants to consume the byproduct of the first plastic build, but now I want to make fuel only for power. There's enough oil up here to support 8 refineries, and each of these refineries can feed its own gas plant. Making fuel directly from oil spits out some residual solids, but I can just throw all of that into the resource sink to delete it. How convenient. The fuel-powered generators take tons of ingredients, with the main one being Caterium wire. I've got some I scavenged from around drop pod wrecks, but I don't have enough to build all 8, so I'll stick with 6 for now. I'm finally starting to get the hang of the pipes, and just one of these is already more power than my entire coal power setup. The weirdest thing is that you can actually overclock things that generate power, and instead of wasting power, it just makes more power without any downsides, so instead of needing to build like 16 of these, I can just use 8. There is a subtle satisfaction in coming to untamed wilderness and leaving behind nothing but wonderful and orderly platforms of industry. This is a ton of power and should be more than enough to build everything I'll need for Phase 3. Speaking of, it's time to get started on that, but not before setting up a hypertube so I can come and go from this place easier. I'll be honest, I was hoping it would be quicker, but whatever. And why does driving the cyber wagon onto a jump pad send you absolutely flying? This part of the game was the most like Factorio, and that's because I spent about 50 minutes running around in circles thinking about ratios. It gets even more complicated when you've got all these alternate recipes to think about, and part of you is like, but what if there's a really good recipe out there that I should just wait for before building all this stuff? But there's nothing to it but to get through it. This is the point of the game where I felt like I'd completely grasped the building mechanics. You can insert splitters and mergers in line with conveyor lifts, and so I've got this whole thing of stacked assemblers. The bottom layer turns the steel ingots into 4 rods, which is 4 times better than the usual method, and those are sent up to the next 3 layers to make screws. My first order of business is making more reinforced plates, and that also takes normal plates. And so I've done the same thing, except for plates. I really like the footprint of these, and with my napkin math, I'm going for about 4 modular engines per minute and 1 adaptive control unit per minute. I think that's a good goal to finish the phase in a timely manner. Next up is turning those into the actual plates, and this is when Satisfactory feels so fiddly. You've got the freedom to do stuff like this, yes, but getting things aligned properly, giving them enough space, and handling all of the belts is an eternity. I cannot tell you how many times I built a platform only to realize it was only 1 meter off and then redoing it. Sure, maybe it's my fault for wanting everything to be aligned, but still. I know what it should look like in my head, but getting to that point is just tons and tons of clicking between each and every input and output. That being said, once everything's done, it actually feels kinda worth it. Okay, the main thing I'm making is motors, and that takes rotors and stators. The rotors take a ton more screws, and so I've got to make another one of these big stacks that makes nothing but screws. This is exactly when I'd love to be able to copy and paste the exact same thing I made over there, but I've got to build it all from scratch, because even if I wanted to build it in that blueprinter, it wouldn't let me because it's extremely limited in size for some strange reason. Like, imagine if in Factorio the number of items you could copy at a time was tied to a research. Honestly, it may sound like cope, but with how repetitive and mindless it was, it did put me in kind of a flow state. I'm using an alternate rotor recipe that uses screws and copper sheets, so I've got to get copper up here. There's a mine nearby, and it's no problem to get all the ore, but as I'm building at scale, I'm realizing just how meta these rows of splitters and mergers are. At first I was trying to split evenly between lanes, but just making them all in a line is by far the easiest option. Except it just feels weird to my Factorio brain because each one splits 50-50. And since machines can buffer up to 100 of an item inside, needed to wait for it to be completely full before that 50-50 split goes away. This means that even though you have, say, 600 items per minute of input and 20 machines consuming 30 per minute, your actual output per minute will start at like 300 per minute and then slowly ramp up to the full 600 only after every machine before the last one has its buffers completely filled. It's this weird logarithmic curve, and like, it goes away if you wait long enough, but it still feels weird. Well, in any case, that's rotors. I spent like 10 minutes redoing the output of the copper sheets to make it properly aligned, but every time the game annoys me, I turn on the decoupled camera, and a lot of that frustration seems to magically seep away. Above those, I'll put the 3 stator assemblers, which I can underclock to meet the actual demand. I'm using the alternate recipe that takes steel pipes, because focusing on steel is just the most convenient, but it also takes quick wire. You can really do whatever you want once you get the hang of these belts. Quick wire is made of Caterium, which... Hold on, this is all very stressful, so let me just watch my slugs for a minute. Anyway, Caterium isn't that far from my main base, and quick wire is really easy to get, requiring only a linear chain of mining, smelting, and turning directly into the quick wire. Now I just need to bring all of that all the way to my base. This is where having a bunch of steel uploaded to the cloud really comes in handy. There we go, our aptly named quick wire went up pretty quick, and combined with those steel pipes, I've got rotors and stators at scale. Now I've got to make a bunch of smart plating again, and continue to get annoyed when the number of assemblers I need doesn't cleanly align with the width of the foundation, so I've got to make this weird clipping abomination. I've changed my mind, I'm putting the smart plating up top and these manufacturers on the bottom. Modular engines take 3 ingredients, and so I've got to use these special buildings with up to 4 inputs. It takes literally 20 minutes of just jumping around in circles, setting up all the random lifts and splitters to actually get the stators and rotors into the motors, and then the motors into the engines, but after all that is done, that leaves only rubber. I'm finally able to use my horrible truck stop. So because it's a horrible mess and rubber and plastic are mixed together, I've got to fix that. Fortunately, with Caterium, I was able to unlock this smart splitter, which basically works as a filter splitter in Factorio. I'm able to sort them out, and some of you might be thinking, but if rubber backs up, suddenly plastic won't be able to go through. And my solution to that is to simply throw any excess into the resource sink. Hey, they gave me the ability to void anything I want, so I might as well use it. And after so much pain and torment, there we have it. The modular engines are finished, and with it, 2/3 of the requirements for Phase 3. The second base has been chugging along making the versatile framework this entire time, so even though it's slow, it's definitely going to finish the 2.5K before I'm done here. I just love this view with all the screws. It's definitely a lot of industry to make 4 engines a minute, and I can only hope that this is enough for the rest of the game, because not being able to copy any of these builds makes me nervous. The adaptive control units take a ton of stuff, and I'm realizing that the items in each phase usually build off the ones from the previous phase, so that means I've got to remake the automated wiring as well as these modular frames. I have a recipe that makes modular frames from reinforced plates as well as rods, and considering how great the steel rods recipe is, it's a no-brainer. The alternate recipe that keeps on giving. I think 8 of these might have been overkill, but it won't hurt. Next, I've got to turn those into heavy modular frames, and that takes encased steel beams, which look like butter if you ask me. That means I've got to use concrete, but I've got this limestone mine in the middle of my base, so it's no problem to throw down a couple random concrete constructors. Then I've got to make the steel beams and cover them in the concrete. It's a good thing I set up this whole place to make about 600 steel ingots a minute. This is when I learned to love the stackable belt supports. This whole place is becoming incredibly cramped, but thanks to the 3rd dimension, I can just run all 3 of these things in the same general footprint. The spaghetti spreads. I've also got to make some random steel pipes, but from here it's just a matter of plugging in all the stuff into one manufacturer. And there it is, 1/4 of the ACUs. Okay, the next thing I need is that automated wiring. I was smart and already planned for the stators they take, but the 50 cables per minute is another thing entirely. I build out a big platform over the encased steel beams to fit it all. Each cable assembler needs 2 wire assemblers, or 1 if you overclocked the wire assembler to 200, or underclocked the cable assembler to 50%. Unlike Factorio, the ratios feel a lot more flexible. It's a lot more casual and open-ended in comparison. Also, Factorio doesn't compel me to build supports under my building so that they don't look like they're defying the laws of gravity. Pooper highway notwithstanding, even my propriety has its limits. I'm too excited to finish Phase 3 to stand around looking at it as it's actually working, but I route those right on top of all the other belts. Before I needed stacks of buildings, but as all these raw ingredients get compressed along the chain, I'm down to only needing 2 assemblers for the automated wiring. This place is becoming a little tangled. That leaves only the computers. Technically it's computers and circuit boards to make the ACUs, but the computers take circuit boards themselves, so really it's just computers I've got to build. Any Factorio player will see the word circuit and feel their MK Ultra kill phrase activate, but thanks to my immense mental fortitude, I have managed to resist the need to build hundreds of these and settled for a modest 2 assemblers. They also take plastic and copper sheets, but I've got that stuff floating around, so it's not too hard to plug it in. Now I get to use the plastic and the rubber from that janky truck stop. I should need only 1 of these computer assemblers to handle all the ACUs, and from there it's only a matter of plugging everything in. The automated wiring, the heavy modular frames, the computers, and the circuit boards, all into this one manufacturer. Ah, wonderful. I designed this to make 1 per minute, but thanks to the magic of summer sloops, I can boost that to, well, not quite 2 times because I don't have enough, but with this boost it'll be less than an hour of waiting. Looking at this whole megalith that doesn't even make versatile frameworks, it makes me realize how powerful summer sloops are. Like, yeah, it increases the power consumption of the machine, but just using 4 of them in one machine is like building 2 of these bases. On that note, what better use of my mandated waiting time than searching for more summer sloops? There's an object detection device that tells me if there's one nearby, and that makes gathering them a whole lot easier. I'm also just picking up any hard drives I find along the way. You usually need some sort of item to open these things, but as you get further in the game, it becomes rarer that it asks for something you don't already have in the cloud. It still feels a little weird needing to explore like this. I think the power of things like sloops, slugs, and spheres encourages exploration, but I just never really got into it, at least not to the point that I wouldn't rather just be building the factory. I like that the space elevator acts as a permanent landmark, pointing the way home with its size, and there's an appeal to building these more bespoke landscapes, but if not for the scattered collectibles, I wouldn't be here. I think design-wise, it's kind of the fallback time sink if you're ever out of things to do, which tends to happen with how the researches and phases are structured. But compared to Factorio, you usually only loiter around like this when your brain is short-circuiting, seeing as there, everything boils down to science, and even if you're waiting for one thing to finish, you usually know what you should be working on in the meantime. Comparatively, I have no idea what comes after Phase 3, and so I can't build what I don't know. Something that will change right now. The space station just keeps on getting bigger, and so far this has taken me about 40 hours to get to this point. This time I've got to make 4 things. Unlike the last one, I have absolutely no idea what any of these things are. Looking through the researches, I can tell that it's going to take aluminum, but apart from that, I am totally in the dark. This is one of the main things that annoyed me about Satisfactory, and it's just this feeling of uncertainty. I can't know what level of production to plan for if I don't even know what I'm supposed to be building, and so it just taunts me when it's like, you've got to build 100 of these, without telling me any more. And to find out, you've got to go through several random researches that require materials you can't even make yet. I was generally approaching this game the same way I would any Factorio mod, and in there you're always looking ahead to try and gauge what you've got to build, but not here. I do know I need to build that aluminum, and looking through the recipes, it's definitely not as simple as throwing ore into a furnace. It takes bauxite, quartz, coal, and water. It's a lot of random stuff, and making it in my base isn't really feasible, so I found this place that has at least everything at a reasonable distance to this one flat area above a lake. It's just, this whole time I'm building, I'm thinking like, I need to make this resource in order to figure out how much of this resource I'll need to make. I decided to err on the side of caution and design for about 480 items per minute, but I wish I could have known. I mean, I guess I could have looked it up on the wiki or something, but I was determined to do this whole thing blindly. I really mean it. I never even saw a single other Satisfactory build while playing this, so everything is my genuine experience and intuition. Here's round 2 of trying to use the blue printer. I didn't like how ugly the conveyor lifts were, and for getting the coal down, I thought I'd make a big spiral of belts, only to realize that stacking it like this, the belts can't even attach to each other. The ends can butt up against the start of the other belt, but they won't actually be connected. Making tileable blueprints in this game is straight up impossible because of this, and so I've just got to do this entire thing manually like so much in this game. Like, look at the power of a single blueprint in Factorio. At least it looks cool. I should mention that aluminum is weird. The first step takes water, and the second step outputs water. You can't void fluids like you can solids, and this means that this whole thing will overflow with water if you're not getting rid of it. So obviously you can get rid of the water byproduct by consuming it in the first step, but that requires making sure that there's still room in the pipe. In Factorio, this would be as easy as setting a circuit condition to a pump to only allow flow from the lake if it's under a certain amount, but here we have no such fine tools. The solution is one I actually discovered on accident while making fuel for the trucks. Fluids are affected by gravity, and so fluids that come from higher up will fill the pipe below faster than one from underneath. By using valves to ensure that that doesn't flow back into the lake, it's effectively a priority merger. I also need to make all this silica from quartz, as well as belt in the coal to make the aluminum scrap, but there it is. The final step is pretty straightforward, just putting all that silica and aluminum scrap into a bunch of foundries to make the finished aluminum ingots. Not to be smug, but this whole thing only took me a little over an hour to set up, and hopefully this is enough, because building onto this would be a royal pain and a half without copy and paste. Even so, there is one big problem left, getting it to my base. I am up on a giant cliff, and I don't want a repeat of the truck incident, so this time I've decided to use the recently unlocked trains. I've got a bit of a reputation with trains in Factorio, and so I've obviously got to use them here. Let's just ignore that it took me like 4 tries to figure out which way to make the train stop, and then how it took me like an hour to build the tracks all over the nothing in between here and my base, but that's the story of how we ended up with this. Not to sound like a broken record, but in Factorio you can just click once and then build a perfect track across the entire map, but in Satisfactory you're limited quite heavily in how long each section can be, which results in this lumpy mess. Whatever, if it works, it works. Ignore that most of it is defying the laws of physics, it's hard making struts 200 meters tall, but I love the trains here. And that's aluminum at the base. Even though I have aluminum, I can't get much further than a couple belt upgrades because I've got to make supercomputers and radio control units. I at least unlocked one of the space elevator items, so I now know that these supercomputers are used in one, so might as well make them at full scale, which to me means at least one assembler with no downtime. It takes a lot more computers, and so I've got to upgrade my production. I wish I'd known about this when I was making them the first time, but that's just the way these things go. This furnace design seems fairly ubiquitous, and so I should have blueprinted it, but again, it's kind of hard to preempt this stuff when you're lost in the sauce. I'm making all this copper to feed the sheets needed for all the circuits I'm gonna make. If I had a nickel for every time I placed a conveyor lift the wrong way or a splitter facing the wrong direction, I'd probably be able to recoup the money I spent on this game. Needing to undo and redo all these tiny mistakes across this whole run probably added at least an hour to my playtime. This is the 100th time I'm building this array of splitters, lifts, and belts, and I've become exceedingly efficient at it. Oh yeah, and I should mention that I've got the hover pack, which lets me build things at elevation without treating it like a QuickTime event between bursts on the jetpack. Unfortunately, it only works when there's power poles nearby, but I'll take it. And, remember when I was complaining about the hypertube speed? Well, apparently you can do this. This was the result of some backseating, but I'll forgive them just this once. The reason I'm over here is because I'm out of plastic. Even turning all of the residue from the fuel plants into plastic, it's still not enough to make all the circuit boards I've got to make, and so I'm using the rest of the oil nodes here on nothing but plastic. That means a lot of refineries, but with my indisputable mastery of the logistics systems, it goes up pretty fast. Now, it still has that residual oil I've got to deal with, and you can't avoid fluid, so I've got to add on some extra refineries. I can turn that into fuel, but unless the power grid is running at maximum, it won't end up consuming all of it, and so in the interests of making sure I've always got plastic, I can instead turn it into something I can avoid, namely petroleum coke. Using the gravity trick again, all of this residual oil will pool in this lower section unless it's overflowing, after which it'll start turning into coke and be disposed of in the resource sink. Sometimes my ingenuity frightens me, and now I should have more than enough plastic to feed my base. It's worth pointing out that even with one truck running 2 items along this massive route, I have never once had throughput problems. These 2 computer assemblers alone take 8 refineries worth of plastic, and with the supercomputers taking another 2, that was a much-needed upgrade. I've also got to expand my cable production to meet demand, but fortunately I anticipated this and was smart enough to leave plenty of space to expand. I'm just going to build the supercomputers directly above those computers. They also take these AI limiters and high-speed connectors. The high-speed connector takes its own manufacturer and also 210 quick wire per minute. Combined with the 100 quick wire of the AI limiter, you might think I'd go upgrade my quick wire supply. And you're right, I'm building aluminum processing. Wait, what was the question? Well, the reason I'm doing this is because the amount of quick wire I need to move exceeds the speed of Mark IV belts, and Mark V belts take aluminum. There's two things you can make with aluminum, and that's aluminum-clad sheets and aluminum casing. The sheets take copper ingots, which I've got tons nearby, and the casing just takes a constructor. It'll be nice to build up some stockpiles before I've got to use this stuff for real, but that'll give me belts capable of moving 780 items per minute. I am so excited I don't take any glamour shots and head straight to the Caterium mine. This is woefully underpowered. There, that's more like it. This makes like 1.2 quick wire per minute, and even though that's about double what I need right now, it doesn't hurt to be prepared. Or maybe it does. I can't really tell if I'll need more of this stuff later, but considering singular recipes are taking hundreds a minute, I feel a whole lot more confident in making more. This is basically the only use for Caterium anyway. It's funny because this near endgame belt is still slower than the most basic Factorio belt in terms of items moved per second. The way that Satisfactory approaches belts is slightly different from Factorio. Here, there's not really any resources that require more than one belt of something. There's always better belts to upgrade it to. Meanwhile, in Factorio, raw resources are usually measured in multiples of blue belts. Like, you might take 4 blue belts of iron and 6 blue belts of copper and turn that into 4 blue belts of green circuits. I feel like you'd really need to try to be limited by belt throughput here. Well, in any case, I've finished these supercomputers. Even though they combine with the ACUs to make the assembly director systems I need for this phase, I mostly need the supercomputers for research, so I'll just shove those in storage for now and combine them later. Still, that's basically 1/4 of Phase 4 finished. I figured I'd explore while those build, and then died to a giant green spider inside of some poison swamp area. I tried to get my stuff back, and then died to the same green spider, which means I need to spend another few minutes crouch jumping all the way there. At least you keep your equipment on death, but you don't keep anything else like ammo, gas masks, or healing items. So whenever this happens, you've either got to spend 10 minutes resupplying or just try to send it, and unfortunately, there's a lot of spiders here. This is what I get for slacking on the combat researches in the MAM, but this time I've made a bunch of stun rebar. It's lower damage, but if there's only one annoying enemy, it works like a charm. After that tremendous waste of time, I've got loads of animal parts that I can turn into DNA capsules, but only now did I realize that you can sloop this stuff as well. I'd just been crafting it by hand, but by turning the parts into protein and then the protein into the capsules, you can get 4 times the DNA capsules for free. Considering this is my main source of the tickets I've been using to get all the fancy decorations you've been seeing, I really wish I'd figured this out sooner. I just handcraft the radio control units needed to research advanced aluminum production. At least I know about the magnetic field generator now, but I am still in the dark about the last 2 items for the space elevator. The only thing I've unlocked are fused modular cubes, and to make those, I've got to go get nitrogen gas. I know where some is, and since it's a fluid, it seems like a smart idea to bring it in by train. Unlike last time, I'm making this rail nice and smooth. I'm just building a 1-meter ramp all the way up this slope. Then I've got to go around my aluminum build with this funny little curve. It's really annoying getting interrupted every 10 seconds by some feral hog, but there's the other end of the train station. Nitrogen comes from this giant well, and to extract it I've got to place this big well pressurizer. As soon as that's powered and in place, I can use the well extractors to put the nitrogen gas into pipes. That's it, really. I was informed that nitrogen gas is a gas, and therefore isn't affected by gravity like the other fluids, and that's the story of how this happened. Now I've just got to bring that to the base. This is actually the last train I built in this run, and I feel kind of guilty for never figuring out the train signals, but with the throughput of just these bi-directional ones and the size of my base, it just never really seemed worth the effort. Maybe if I played again and planned for a massive base from the start, but it's much harder to scale up compared to Factorio, so I feel like I'm kind of stuck with this base size. So these fused modular cubes are really easy. All they take are some heavy cubes, aluminum casing, and nitrogen gas. All things I've got nearby. They do take this specialized blender building that can combine liquids and solids, but I don't think I'll ever need more than one of these. I fill it with power shards and sloops and get it up to 1,000 megawatts of power draw. That's 2 of my fuel generators running non-stop. With those cubes, I can finally unlock the 3rd item, propulsion rockets. The throughput of this base was perfectly designed and suited for Phase 3, but it's starting to become a little strained. The good news is, even though they're really complicated, I already make most everything they take. One thing I do need to make is crystal oscillators. I've had these things unlocked since forever, but now I've got to actually automate them. That means I've got to get some quartz. The closest source is in the middle of this purple jungle, and this game shares traits with Factorio that in most situations a really long belt beats most quote-unquote intelligent solutions. While I was heading back to hook up the power, I accidentally get sucked into the turbo tube. Well, now that I'm here, might as well check up on it. Yep, everything's fine. Also, I tamed one of these weird things. Okay, cool. That's all the quartz crystal I'll ever need. It's a good thing I made extra reinforced plates, but I'll need to upgrade my cables. Again. These are used to make radio control units, which also take computers, and it's a good thing I can just use sloops to make up for my supply shortages. I feel like this game is very lenient, partly due to how difficult expanding old builds can be. The belt upgrades, the shards, the sloops, not only can you straight up double anything provided you explored enough, you can theoretically increase the production of any single building by 5 times. You have modules and beacons in Factorio, but getting the full benefits of beacons requires specifically building around them, and so you can't just go back and easily compensate for any supply deficiencies. At least, not until the quality mechanic was introduced in Space Age, and the ability to salvage terrible builds by gambling hard enough is one of my major gripes with it, but that is neither here nor there. The radio control units are used to make turbo motors, which need these cooling units, which need heat sinks, and as I'm making these things, I'm realizing 2 things. Number 1, it was really smart to make 1,000,000 copper sheets over there, and number 2, I'm using basically the entire throughput of my aluminum build, so it seems I've accidentally planned for the perfect amount. The cooling systems also take nitrogen gas and water, and I've got this lake next to my train station, so that's perfect. Then I've just got to throw everything into this turbo motor manufacturer. These things are also used to build Mark III mining drills, but now I've got to do some surgical spaghetti to get the motors over here. This is the weirdest thing about Satisfactory. You know that you only need so much of an item, and since I've got a container filled to the brim with modular engines already, I know that these motors are fair game. In Factorio, you're usually building for a concentrate of production, but here you can actually just build enough of something. It's a strange concept. But yes, you can actually build more than you need. Terrifying. Anyway, there's propulsion rockets. I should probably get started on the other things. I cover this giant rock in the middle of my base with walls and windows, because I don't know about you, but I always like to keep an eye on my rocks. And then the fuse blows. It's funny how it instantly drops me out of the sky. I'd gotten so used to not needing to worry about power that I forgot it was actually a thing. I guess I had been a little overzealous with my sloopage. I've got to make more, and with some power shards, there's still some oil to be extracted, and so I just built another set of fuel-powered generators. You've already seen this once, so I'll skip to the end, and there she is! What a beauty. This little oil field is probably my favorite part of the base. There's just something about this blend between the natural and the industrial that really does it for me. But no time to delay, I am finally making those assembly director systems. I've already got all the supercomputers and ACUs I'll need in storage, so this is mostly just a waiting game. I've kind of mentioned it before, but you never appreciate making videos about 2D games until you need to edit something coherent out of footage that's constantly whipping all over the place. That just leaves the magnetic field generators. All I'll really need for these are electromagnetic control rods, which take some stators and limiters. Since the part of this base that mainly uses stators is mostly offline, they're basically up for grabs. Seriously, it's just an odd sensation to me, since Factorio never stops producing. Except maybe military science, but that one hardly qualifies as a science pack. These take versatile frameworks, and guess what I've been building for the past 40 hours in my second starter base? I can just complete this entire thing simply by transporting these by hand. And that's 3/4 of the items done. I'm running low on copper sheets though, and ordinarily I wouldn't mention something like this, but I just like to use it as an example. I want to add another row of constructors on top to increase production by 50%, but to do that requires deleting every single lift, every single splitter, and every single belt piece by piece before slowly rebuilding the entire thing. You see, with the amount of effort it takes to refactor old builds, you might as well just build a new one entirely from scratch. Anyway, with 50 turbo motors, I can finally research the last thing standing in my way. That's right, after literally 15 or 20 hours since starting Phase 4, I am allowed the privilege to know what I've got to build, and it's nuclear pasta. It doesn't look too bad, but it takes radio control units. I wish I knew because I'm not making enough, but I guess I'll fix it with sloops. That's just to make the cube, though. The actual pasta takes an obscene amount of copper, literally 600 ingots per minute for 0.5 nuclear pasta per minute. This is when I decided I'd finally use the blueprinter. Hooray! I might not be able to make a perfectly tileable blueprint, but I can at least save myself 80% of the clicks it would take otherwise. It does make me feel a little more powerful, because this whole thing went up in only a few minutes after getting the research. I'm just a little eager to reach the next phase. 600 ingots is the entire output of a normal resource node with a fully overclocked Mark III miner. It's funny because this entire array of furnaces is churning out enough ingots to feed 2 constructors, but there's the copper powder. And the pressure cubes go up instantly since everything is right next door. The nuclear pasta itself is made in this gigantic particle accelerator. I had to give it its own platform and everything. I've got to say, while straight is my main mode, I can appreciate a good curve. Now we can power up the particle accelerator. Now there's a building. I'll say one thing for Satisfactory, it's got good visuals. Factorio builds have their own appeal, but I've got to admit that while being dwarfed by the buildings makes building itself less straightforward, it pays off with things like this. Yes, this is an elaborate way to say that Satisfactory is more form than function, but there's nothing wrong with that. And after that light show, I have made 1 nuclear pasta. Making all 100 is going to take over 3 hours at this rate. How nice of them to put the most time-consuming product at the very end of the phase. At least I can fill it with summer sloops and have that time, and it popped a fuse. I just doubled my power network only an hour ago, and already this thing's popping a fuse. Using 4 sloops puts this thing's maximum draw at 6,000 megawatts. That is practically the draw of my entire base. I'm not in the mood to upgrade power again, and so I try something I found in the MAM, this alien power augmenter. It takes 10 precious sloops, so it had better be good, but basically it just adds 500 megawatts as well as multiplying all the power production by 10%. It gives me an additional 1.5 gigawatts altogether. And guess what? It's still not enough to run this thing fully slooped. It feels really stupid, but underclocking also reduces power consumption, so I can at least take some sloops. It's only like 0.65 per minute now instead of 0.5, but at least it's something. So I've got nothing better to do, and so I do something I should have done a long time ago. I am finally automating explosives and putting them into dimensional storage. I am also making rocket fuel for my jetpack, and it's this whole complicated process that has me running all over the place gathering random materials from all around the oil area, and so I'm just gonna skip to the end. Unsurprisingly, rocket fuel is pretty powerful, and since I can't use my hover pack outside of my base, it was worth the investment. Best 2 hours of my life I've ever spent. That's still not enough for all the pasta to be done, though. And in the interests of recouping the slooping I've spent on that power augmenter, what better way to use my freshly made rocket fuel than running around all corners of the map? I've also automated rifle ammo, so no more running out of that either. It's probably far enough in the video to talk about my thoughts on the setting. Some people seem to really not like Ada, and I can see it. She's constantly demeaning you and downplaying all your achievements. I personally didn't mind and found some of it dismally amusing, but overall it results in an entirely different atmosphere than Factorio. There you're a master of your own destiny, exploiting and destroying at your leisure. The Factorio engineer is a true Chad amongst Chads. He's someone you can drag into power level debates, and if someone pits him against Goku, the question inevitably becomes, but how much prep time does he have? The Satisfactory Pioneer, on the other hand, is portrayed as a wage slave under the heel of an uncaring corporation with an unhelpful artificial intelligence sent to keep an eye on them. This isn't even to mention the deeper lore that you're just a clone and humanity is probably dead, so spiritually it's not as empowering as Factorio. It's not a deal breaker, and most people probably won't think about it that hard, but it's just something I've noticed. Also, the aliens' conversations were a little overwrought without adding much. Anyway, that's Phase 4 finally finished, clocking in at around 62 hours, and now I need 1,000 nuclear spaghetti. Well, considering it took me about 20 hours to finish Phase 4 and I'm making 0.6 a minute, that means I'll be finished with it in a mere 27 hours. And now I'm back to not knowing what any of these things are. Hooray! Obviously, I'll want another pasta assembler down the line, but there's the whole power problem. I could go hunt out every oil field on the map and fill it with power plants, but instead I've decided on making nuclear power. It is probably the most complicated process to date with a million steps, but the end of it promises near-endless power. I've got to get like iron, coal, limestone, copper, quartz, sulfur, water, and nitrogen gas. It basically takes every single resource in the game. I'm not going to explain all of this because it's a mess, but the main things I need are concrete and encased steel beams. After that, I need sulfuric acid, and that takes sulfur. There's only one mine anywhere nearby, and considering how radioactive a single piece of uranium is, I want this whole plant to be far, far from my base. It's been long enough since the truck incident for me to consider using them again, and so I've got this guy driving to and from the sulfur mine. Also, I thought the particle accelerator could use some encouragement, so I've given it an extra ring and filled it with slugs. Never has a finer thing been crafted by human hands. So, to make the actual fuel cells, you've got to cover uranium ore in concrete and then combine that with encased uranium as well as some electromagnetic control rods. It also does the thing where it spits out fluid I've got to use, so once again we need a gravity priority system. I probably should have just slooped and overclocked a single manufacturer instead of making 4, but whatever. The actual uranium ore was a pain to find because it's in the middle of this underground cave. Seriously, it took me like 5 minutes of searching to even find it. As much as I wanted this to be its own independent build, I draw the line at the electromagnetic control rods, and so I figured I'd test out these drone bays I've unlocked. I just build one over here where I'm actually making control rods and hook it up. They're basically like requester chests and logistics bots in Factorio, and then it's super easy to transport items between them. They do need fuel though, I'll worry about that later, but that's uranium fuel cells. You'd think I'd be nearly done, but nope. I want to run 4 nuclear power plants at full throttle, and that means each one of these needs 600 cubic meters of water a minute, which is the limit of the highest tier of pipe in the game. First, I've actually got to pump out that much, and building all of these pipes and extractors in the water nearby drove me insane. I now know that I should have built foundations under the water so that there was something to build supports off of, but if you don't do that, you'll end up with this horrible mess. Okay, the sulfuric acid also takes water, so I've got 5 pipes to run, and now I just got to get this all the way back to my plants. I really like the stackable pipes for this. It reminds me of the old Factorio nuclear power where you'd need to run like 12 pipes in parallel before they changed the fluid mechanics. I just love the way this thing turned out. I think my favorite thing about these automation games is the exquisite forms that can come from pure function. I think Satisfactory's main appeal is just how much you can decorate your builds, and so I've decided to try and make this one a little bit more aesthetic than my others. I've run the pipes around like so, and added these random pillars to help me space things out. I've got the fuel cells and the water, but I am still not done. I could power this thing up, but within a few minutes I'd be overrun with nuclear waste. I need to get rid of it. You can't just throw it in the resource sink, so you've got to either shove it into a bunch of boxes or do the responsible thing and clean it up. Not one to shy away from a challenge, I opt for the latter. You've got to make non-fissile uranium, then throw that into a particle accelerator along with some waste to make plutonium pellets, then encase those in concrete, then combine those with steel beams, more control rods, and heat sinks, which means I need aluminum and copper sheets, and that means I need to bring in even more stuff from the aluminum build nearby, and after all of that, I can make plutonium fuel rods. And I'd assume that I'd be able to throw those in with the uranium fuel rods to get nuclear waste out, but I realized that it was only called nuclear waste in my head, and it was actually called uranium waste. If you burn plutonium, you get plutonium waste, which has its own complicated crafting path. And I couldn't have known that until I'd put in all the effort to make a plutonium fuel cell, because the game doesn't tell you its recipe or that it even exists until you make some. I couldn't have possibly known. So screw doing things absolutely waste-free, this is as far as I'm getting, but this massively compresses the waste and I can actually upload it to the dimensional cloud. Even better, I can use them to power my drones for 1,000,000 years with a single stack. The only downside is now I have radioactive drones flying around my base, but I'll live. And there it is. After literally 8 hours of effort, I have nuclear power. I was pressured a bit since I've got to do this for the content, but playing in my leisure, I probably would have built for looks a bit more often. Also, it's a little hard on your first playthrough because you haven't gotten a hang of the building mechanics yet. This baby can churn out 25 gigawatts of power. That's basically tripled my entire power grid, and can actually allow me to fully sloop my pasta accelerator. Alright, after all of that, I am finally ready to tackle the remaining 3 items. It takes this stuff, the strange alien matter. It's kind of funny that my base has grown over this massive pit, but what used to be used only to make dimensional storage now has a use to win. I've got to make fixite ingots. They can only be made by combining reanimated sand with other ingots, and I don't care that aluminum and caterium are technically more efficient, iron is everywhere, and so I'm using that. And hey, I got to use this smelter blueprint again, so that means it was officially worth the effort. Since my fastest belt is 780, here's 780 ingots per minute, which will make like 30 fixite ingots per minute. The ingots are made in these converters, and beyond making fixite, they can also use sand to turn resources into other resources. I guess since this map is technically limited in resources, this is their solution to any imbalances that might arise. Being able to turn iron ore into coal would let me make tons more steel, but I haven't had to make raw materials in ages, so it can't be that useful. Those need to be turned into trigons in a constructor, but as soon as I've got to that, the only other ingredients are those assembly director systems that I've already got and some water. I've also got to make 1,000 of these, but unlike the pasta, they aren't coming out at a rate of 1 per minute, so they certainly won't be the bottleneck here. Then out of nowhere, a fuse blows. I just built that reactor. I go and check on it, trying to figure out what was wrong, and turns out that this pipe looked connected, but it was hidden by the support, because that's a thing apparently. That wasn't even the main issue though. The issue was that I didn't realize that the water output and the sulfuric acid input is a closed loop that allows you to keep reusing the same amount of fluid, but after that, power's back. It's a good thing too, because I've got to make another particle accelerator. This one takes in a metric ton of coal a minute and turns it all into diamonds, which are then turned into time crystals in this converter here. Presumably I'll need them later, but right now I need them to figure out how to build the third item on my list, AI expansion servers. This one's a little weird. I need both the time crystals and the diamonds I just made in order to make dark crystals in this particle accelerator. It's weird because they take dark matter residue, which is made from excited photonic matter, which you can create from thin air in a converter. Except I don't want to make dark matter residue because it's actually a byproduct for making every single step in these servers. Altogether, I'll need 3 of these new quantum encoders, but it's not actually that complicated, or maybe I've just gotten too good at this game. They'll take photonic matter and spit out that dark matter residue, which I'll use to feed the dark matter crystals. All the other ingredients are things I already have nearby, like the supercomputers and magnetic field generators. In the time I spent building nuclear power, I'd gotten more than enough of the Phase 4 items to build all the Phase 5 ones, so all that stuff is fair game. Making all this stuff will create more dark matter than the dark matter crystals can consume, so I'm just operating on faith that the last item will solve that, but until then, I'll simply employ the time-honored Factorio tradition of flushing the system manually whenever it gets too full. Then I tried to place a container to catch all the finished expansion servers, then my game started lagging like crazy. I've got no idea what is going on, but it's not going away. I test the settings and get nothing. I restart the game, and it is still absolutely horrendous. My PC was screaming at me at this point. This has never happened before, and in a last-ditch effort I restarted my whole computer, and then it was fine. I don't know what I did, but I guess trying to place that one thing must have caused the mother of all memory leaks. Well, at least that's over with. I love flying near my drone bay and getting a dose of radiation. It keeps me awake. That's the third item finished, and we're almost there. I've got to steal some of these superposition oscillators first. Let's skip past the hour of sloop hunting and pretend I was able to research this instantly. The final item, the ballistics warp drive, honestly looks really easy. I've already built 75% of it, but the singularity cells takes nuclear pasta. Yeah, the thing that I'm still only 60% finished with, that takes more of that. Great. That means I've got to find another 600 copper ingots per minute. And this brings me to one of my main gripes with Satisfactory, is that the scaling is completely vertical. Despite getting stronger drills and better belts, the same steel build I built at the end of Phase 2 is still enough to get me through Phase 5. The only time raw resources are involved is in something like this, where it demands suddenly 600 ingots for one recipe. Keep in mind that less than that in steel is supporting this entire base. I've also got to make a lot more crystals, and that means another 600 units of coal into diamonds. Then you have these singularity cells that take 100 iron plates and 200 concrete a minute. This is partially why I never needed more than 2 trains, because unless you're doing something outside of just beating the game, you simply don't need that many raw resources. It rankles a bit that they give you these tools to extract more and more resources, and then their only idea is to make the endgame recipes take 10 times as much as usual. Meanwhile, in Factorio, you're always going to be limited by your earliest builds. It'll be like, what's that? You made 4 circuit assemblers and got through chemical science, and now you want to get further? Well, too bad. Triple it, and then maybe you'll get through production and utility science. It's more about scaling horizontally. There, it's easy to just copy an entire furnace stack or circuit build if you need more, but considering how much effort it is to build new builds in Satisfactory, I can understand if they didn't want to throw people back into making reinforced plates again. But that's the final item. All I've got to do is quite literally wait, and so it seems like a good time to get my general impressions of the game out. Originally, I felt like Satisfactory didn't need to exist when Factorio already existed, but now that I've played it, it's clear that the way that they approach things is different enough to leave room for both of them in this world. Satisfactory is more concerned with the looks and the feeling of building your own personal megalith, while Factorio is more focused on the endless expansion of the factory. Building in Factorio is a complicated affair of puzzling out resources, ratios, and logistics as you try to make the most efficient design for every step of the process, whereas Satisfactory is more about the spectacle of the thing. It's objectively worse to build in first person, and the amount of clicking and looking around and running power lines and shoving your face inside of things to make sure that it's actually going where you want it to go cannot be overstated. That kind of stuff is almost completely absent from Factorio. Altogether, Satisfactory lacks the power you feel from a true late-game Factorio run, where you can stamp blueprints by the dozen and just have your construction bots build an entire factory in minutes. And yet, I found myself staring at this factory more than anything I've ever built in Factorio. Except maybe my final C-block base. That's a work of art. I do think that the lack of blueprints does solve one problem Factorio has, and that's beginners importing someone else's base, because so many people's builds look achingly generic. But it feels like Satisfactory bases are much more unique and will vary from player to player and run to run. I've seen some people complain about the early game, and while I've experienced far worse playing C-block, it does feel like you're not really playing the game until you have fuel power, overclocking, Mark II mining drills, and a jetpack. The part I enjoyed the most was when I was planning out Phase 3 and first building my main base, but everything after that felt like just hacking on random limbs until victory. I think the main crux of my issues with it is that it doesn't have a clear line of what you need to make and in what amounts. It hides recipes from you. If you build something for 5 per minute in one phase, then suddenly it's only in demand for 1 per minute, it just discombobulates your entire factory. I don't like looking at this and seeing machines not working. I want it to be a synchronized ballet of bolts and belts. You only ever need arbitrary amounts of things, so it's a lot more stockpiling and a lot less streamlined building. You need 50 of this to get this research, then 100 of this for the next phase. In Factorio, you're only ever building science, and so you're always using that science no matter what phase the game you're in. Getting the research to unlock new items and beating the game is one and the same, so you're encouraged to keep throughput constant and you're not running all over the place swapping items around to get random researches. Overall, I don't really like the endgame, because once you've finished Phase 5, there is nothing to do but throw all these items into resource sinks until you get a trophy. I mean, even Factorio, you could argue that there's no reason to keep playing after you win, but the infinite researches for things like robot speed and mining productivity do open up new ways to play that are separate from just launching the rocket. Going for maximum science per minute is its own thing, but here you just have the sink. Even if you're going for the Golden Nut achievement, it's not going to be a big varied factory like this. You're just going to be spamming the one item with the best resource to points ratio, which seems to be the singularity cells. You have all the alternate recipes for things, but no real incentive to use them outside of the early to mid game. My Factorio brain really wanted me to scale up and make an enormous factory, but it just never felt appropriate. Building big is an investment, and the time skill doesn't encourage it. In the time it takes to build a massive factory that makes 10 of an item per minute, you could have made a factory that makes only 1, slack off the rest of the time, and still finish all 100 before the big factory. Also, with the circuit networks of Factorio, it gives you so much power to make highly specialized builds. Admittedly, it's only something you'll use as an expert, but Satisfactory doesn't have any of that, so there were times I had an idea for a build only to realize that it was impossible because this isn't Factorio. But anyway, even though I've got 2 pasta machines running, I'm still waiting on them, so I decided to cover the space elevator in explosives. It's lagging the game whenever I look at it, but at last, it's time. I will say, Factorio never let me do this. Overall, I enjoyed my time with Satisfactory. Hopefully none of you came away with the impression that I wasn't having fun while playing it, and maybe some of these opinions are biased because I'm already an expert in Factorio and still relatively new to Satisfactory. But you only get to be a beginner once, and this is what happened. I'm really interested to see what some Satisfactory experts have to say about my playthrough, because like I said, I tried to keep this as clean as possible. Unfortunately, there were more stages to the liftoff, so I wasn't able to enjoy the endgame view from up here, but there we go. I'm not sure I'd play Satisfactory again, because it doesn't feel like it benefits from multiple runs like Factorio does, since the map is set and there's sort of this optimal place to build everything. But maybe I'd be interested in seeing how it changes if you already know all the recipes from the start. It's a good thing I didn't make 2 of those random concrete towers. I kinda want to get the Golden Nut, but this video is already long enough as is, so maybe I'll get it on my own time, since I feel like I haven't experienced everything this game has to offer. I think I would have enjoyed the exploring a bit more if there were places that were locked off Subnautica style until you're able to access them through new researches or through building, because as it is, it felt kinda like they were trying to bribe you into exploring by making waiting a core part of the game and sprinkling collectibles around that boost your factory. But that's a one-sided influence, and I would have liked the factory building to affect the exploration beyond just a gun and a jetpack. And oh my god, the manta ray photobomb. If that's not a blessed ending, I don't know what is. Well, that's satisfactory. As always, I've got to thank my patrons for sticking with me for videos like this. I feel like I usually prefer to bring some expertise into my videos, so making a video where the entire purpose is me being bad at it feels a little out of character for me, but hopefully you enjoyed seeing how a Factorio player approaches things. This whole run took me about 81 hours, and if you take out the truck instance as well as the 1 hour I spent staring into space because I didn't realize that pressing escape doesn't pause the game, then that's 78 hours for my first playthrough. Is that good? Is that bad? You'll need to tell me, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.